made a big mistake by cheating on my alpha husband. This is how he took revenge. Have you ever been in a situation when a seemingly small mistake ended up costing you greatly? It happened to me. I didn't even have any fucking clue that it will turn out to be like this. Trust is very important for any relationship. It takes a lot of effort to build this trust and very little to break it. I made the mistake of breaking it, and I regret that. Till this date. I, female 36, married to my husband, male 40. We have been married for 2 years. My husband is a professor in our local university. I'm an assistant professor in the same university. I joined this university 3 years back. The pay was really good, and the working hours were also less compared to my previous place of work. My husband is a senior professor in this university. He is well respected there. I met my husband in university when I was hired as an assistant professor to work under him. My husband was present during my interviews. I developed an instant crush on him. He was smart and fun. I was over the moon when I was hired to work under him as his assistant. We had to work in close proximity as our work demanded that. I used to attend his classes with him and also corrected test papers after work together. Working together worked in our favor. We used to hang out a lot with each other. One thing led to another and we started going on dates together. Our relationship started with small talks and casual jokes. We soon started having lunch together and spending more and more time with each other. The attraction was mutual, and it wasn't long before we got in a relationship with each other. After being together for a year, my husband asked me to marry him. I liked being with him. He was well respected in the college. He spoke with certain authority. All that had me really falling for him. I loved the way he cared for me. I told him yes, and we got married in a small wedding ceremony. Our married life was going well. I had moved in with him in his small bungalow. We were happy together. Our life was going great. We used to work together and then got to come home together. I was happy and content in my marriage. I felt like I had everything I ever wanted. My husband was the perfect alpha male. He was strong, confident, and charismatic. He knew what he wanted and how to get it. I admired him for his intelligence and hardworking nature. I felt like we were a perfect match, but soon I lost him. A year into our marriage, I made a small mistake that ended up costing me everything. It was a mistake that I didn't even think twice about when I made it, but the consequences that followed were unimaginable. I wish I could rectify that mistake. It all started with a new assistant professor who had joined our university. Let's call him George. George was around the same age as me. George was charming, confident, and, to be honest, very attractive. I had casually talked to him a few times before, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. However, one day, when my husband was out of town and I was working from a cafe near the university, me and George happened to bump into each other. We both ordered coffee and started chatting. The conversation was lighthearted and fun. We discussed everything from work to our personal lives. George was single and had just moved into the town. He was very easy to talk to, and before I knew it, a few hours had passed. We exchanged numbers and promised to keep in touch. I didn't think much of it at the time. I enjoyed talking to George, but I was happily married to my husband. Little did I know my small mistake of exchanging numbers with George would lead to a series of events that would turn my life upside down. Over the course of the next few weeks, George and I started texting each other. Initially, it was just casual conversations about work and our interests. But soon, our conversations became more flirtatious. I couldn't believe it at first. I was pretty sure that everyone was aware that I was married and who my husband was. George started sending me flirty texts messages which were subtle. I could have ignored it if I wanted to, but I didn't. I responded back to him in a flirty way too. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. I would text him only when my husband wasn't around, as I couldn't risk my husband finding this out. I was just having fun with texts. I didn't think I was doing anything very wrong. One day, my husband and I got into a really big fight. He wanted a baby, whereas I told him that I wasn't ready yet. We already had this discussion, and I had told him that I didn't want a baby. Having a baby came with a lot of responsibilities. I didn't think I was at that point of time where I was ready for those responsibilities. I tried to make my husband understand this, but he was too furious to listen. He said some really hurtful words to me. He told me that it was in my nature to run away from responsibilities. It made me very upset and sad. He left the house to get some space from me. I was home alone. The fight left me feeling upset and vulnerable. And that's when George messaged me. asking if I wanted to grab a drink with him. I hesitated, but the temptation was too strong, so I agreed to meet him. My husband needed his space away from me, so it was fine that I was taking my space too. I thought to myself as I texted George that I was down for meeting that night. We went to a bar far away from the university. It was on the outskirts of the town, so there were slim chances that I would run into someone who would recognize me there. The bar had an amazing atmosphere. The dim lights and soft music set the perfect mood for a night out. The drinks were flowing, and the conversation was light and fun. But then things started to get a little out of hand. I got very drunk that night. I ordered multiple shots of vodka. George was by my side throughout the night. We were flirting with each other continuously. It started to feel like we were the only two people in the world. I forgot about my fight with my husband. It was nice to be away from the stress of my marriage for a while. The chemistry between me and George was undeniable, and it was unlike anything I had ever felt before. That night, I cheated on my husband. George came out to drop me to my cab. We stood there and waited for my cab to come. We were waiting on the pavement when he kissed me. He gave me enough time and space to back out, but I didn't. I kissed him back. I was so drunk that I didn't realize anything till the next morning. I woke up with a terrible hangover the next morning. It took me some time to realize what had happened last night. My kiss with George came back to memory, and I instantly thought, fuck, what had I done? I went out of the bedroom and found my husband at the kitchen counter. He was quite calmer than yesterday. He asked me where I was last night. I told him that I went out with my friends. He nodded to that and then said sorry for our fight that happened the previous day. He told me that he'll give me as much time as I want and there's no hurry to have a baby. He just couldn't wait to grow our family. I was instantly consumed by the guilt of what I had done last night. I kissed another man when my husband was dreaming of growing our family together. It was just a kiss, but still. It was a mistake that I deeply regretted, but there was no going back now. I knew I had made a grave error in judgment, and the regret consumed me. I wanted to come clean and tell my husband, but I was too scared of his reaction. I was terrified that he might find out about my mistake and leave me. I knew him. He wasn't the type of man who would let something like this slide. I saw text messages from George when I went to my bedroom. There were texts from him the previous night asking me if I had reached home safe. There were also texts about how he really enjoyed our kiss and would like to see me again. I immediately blocked him. The guilt of not being honest with my husband weighed heavily on me every day. I loved my husband, and I knew that if he found out the truth, it would break his heart. But still, I couldn't bring myself to tell him what had happened between George and me. Every night I lay awake in bed, motionless, reliving the moment I made my mistake. The guilt and fear were heavy like a physical weight, crushing my chest. It had been weeks since that day, but I still didn't have the courage to tell my husband what I had done. My throat seemed to close up every time I tried to form the words. So I decided to keep it a secret. I tried to act normal in front of my husband for the next few weeks. But every time he touched me, every time he kissed me, I felt like a fraud. I felt like I was deceiving him. I was living a lie. I was stuck in this limbo of guilt and fear until one day, George came to the seminar conducted by my department. My husband was the speaker in this event. As soon as I saw George, my heart sank. He knew what we had done, and he could easily reveal the truth if he wanted to. Fortunately for me, he didn't say anything about that night or even acknowledge me in any way. He kept his distance throughout his time on campus, never once giving me an indication that he remembered our secret kiss from months ago. I was relieved that he hadn't said anything about us, but at the same time, my guilt only intensified even further. It felt like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off at any moment. The day finally came when everything fell apart. It was a Monday morning and I was running late for work. I had a meeting with one of my colleagues and I was already 10 minutes late. I quickly grabbed my bag and rushed out of the house. I got in my car and started driving towards the university. As I was driving, I realized that I had left my phone at home. I panicked for a moment, but I decided to keep going. I knew that I would be late for my meeting, but I didn't want to turn back and risk being even later. My husband didn't have anything scheduled for the morning. He was going to come separately before his afternoon meeting. When I finally arrived at the university, I rushed to my meeting. It was a productive meeting, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. As soon as the meeting was over, I rushed to my office. When I opened the door, I saw my husband sitting at my desk. He had my phone in his hand, and he was scrolling through my messages. I froze. I knew at that moment that everything was about to come crashing down. My small mistake had finally caught up with me. My husband looked up at me with a look of betrayal in his eyes. I felt like the biggest fool in the world. He stood up and handed me my phone. "Why did you do it?" he asked me, his voice barely above a whisper. He had scrolled through my text messages with George. He read all our text messages where he flirted with me and I flirted back. He also mentioned the kiss in the texts. I had no words to say. I knew that there was no justification for what I had done. All I could do was hang my head in shame and wait for whatever was to come. My husband told me how he knew something was wrong when I started avoiding him in the last weeks. He told me that he had thought I was still upset about the baby thing, and that's why he was giving me space. "I never thought you'd betray me like this," he said to me. My husband didn't say anything else. He simply left my office, leaving me alone with my guilt and shame. I knew that I had lost his trust, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to earn it back. I sat at my desk for what felt like hours, numb with shock and regret. I had destroyed the one thing that mattered most to me, my marriage, and all because of a stupid kiss. I went home after some time. I needed to explain to my husband that it was a mistake and that I really loved him. My husband was sitting on the couch in the living room drinking his whiskey. I went to him to hold him and explain to him what had happened, but he rejected my touch and pushed me away. His eyes were cold and distant, and I could feel the anger radiating off of him. I knew that I had hurt him deeply, and there was nothing I could do to make it right. I felt an urgent need to explain everything to him. I told him how it was just a kiss, and that happened only because I was extremely drunk. He looked at me with so much anger but didn't say anything to me. He left the house after my confession. For the next few days, my husband barely spoke to me. It was like I didn't exist. I begged him for his forgiveness, but he refused to even look at me. I felt like a ghost wandering without any purpose through our home. Days turned into weeks with my husband and I living together but barely speaking. The air between us was thick with tension and unsaid words that hung like a loaded gun. I tried to reach out to him, but he kept pushing me away, refusing to even look at me. Everything I tried went in vain. I tried to hug him while he was sleeping, but he rejected my touch. For a while, I thought that we could work things out if I just kept putting efforts to earn his forgiveness. I thought that we could talk about what had happened and find a way to move forward, but it seemed like my husband had already made up his mind about what he wanted to do. One day, he came to me and told me that he wanted to talk about something. Hope blossomed as I sat there to listen to his words. I thought that maybe he has finally forgiven me and wants to make things all right again. He immediately crushed all the hope when he asked me to leave the house. He told me that he needed some space to think about things. He said it was hard for him to think with a clear mind when I'm in the same house as him. I was devastated. I couldn't believe that it had come to this. I didn't fight his decision. A small part of me hoped that maybe if we stayed away for a while, he would miss me and everything would get back to normal. I rented a small apartment in town and moved out of our home. It was really hard for me to leave the house. I didn't pack all of my stuff as I had hoped that I was going to come back and live here with him again. I moved to the apartment. It was a lonely existence there without my husband. I spent most of my days in tears, regretting everything that had happened. Or I would try to escape everything by getting lost in my work. I had requested work from home because I was too depressed to face the world. Work was a good distraction until I lost it too. One day, I got a call from the head of my department telling me that I was immediately terminated from my job. I was stunned. It felt like everything was falling apart in my life, my marriage, my home, and now my career. I had poured my heart and soul into my work, only to have it taken away from me because of a foolish mistake. I knew that it was my husband's doing. He had always been controlling, but I never thought he would go this far. I begged and pleaded with the head of my department to reconsider, but it was no use. The head of the department explained that my husband had called and demanded that they fire me from my job. He had told them that if they didn't remove me, he would resign, and the university couldn't have that. He had used his power and influence in the university to fire me. With no job and no home, I felt lost and helpless. I didn't know what to do or where to turn. The guilt and shame of my mistake were still heavy on my heart, and now I had to deal with the consequences of my husband's revenge too. Days turned into weeks, and I struggled to make ends meet. I didn't have much savings with me either. I applied for jobs everywhere, but no one would hire me. I felt like a failure in every aspect of my life. But then something unexpected happened. George reached out to me. He had mailed me since I had blocked his contact on my phone. It wasn't hard to get my mail since George was also a professor in the university where I used to work. He told me that he had heard about what had happened, and he wanted to help me. At first, I was hesitant. After all, he was the reason why I was in this mess in the first place. I was already jobless and had a husband who hated me. I didn't know what worse could happen to me, so I thought might as well meet George and see what happens. I met George at a small cafe near my apartment. He was dressed in a smart suit and had a charming smile on his face. He offered to buy me a coffee and we sat down at a small table by the window. He listened patiently as I poured out my heart to him. I told him everything that had happened, about my husband, my job, and my life falling apart. I felt a sense of relief as I spoke, like a weight was being lifted off my chest. This was the first time I was sharing this with someone. George sat quietly for a moment after I had finished. Then he leaned forward and took my hand. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I had no idea that things had gotten this bad for you." He looked into my eyes, and for a moment, I felt like I was drowning in them. There was a warmth and kindness in his gaze that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was almost comforting. "I want to help you," he said. His gesture was comforting. My husband hated me at the moment, but this man wanted to help me out. I told him that even though I appreciated his gesture, I couldn't accept it. I didn't want to make my husband more angry. Taking help from George would have done more harm than good. But as the days passed and my situation became even more desperate, I found myself thinking about George's offer more and more. I had no other options left, and he seemed genuine in his desire to help me. He had told me that he had connections in the academic world and that he could help me find a new job. My husband wasn't picking my calls. I had called him so many times to talk to him about my termination, but there was no response by his side. He was completely avoiding my existence, so I called George and told him that I had changed my mind. George helped me in finding a new job in another university. I had a hope that my life was finally getting back on track. Getting a job was the first step in making everything all right. He also helped me with my CV and cover letter. I told him that I was really grateful for his help. We weren't even friends for long, but still this guy was doing so much for me. I think that George was just trying to help me out because he also felt guilty for what had happened with me. We didn't flirt again or did anything inappropriate with each other. He was genuine in his approach to help me out in finding a job. I kept thinking about my husband and how I would have done anything to earn his forgiveness. I went to the university to talk to him, but he didn't even look at my direction and told me to leave. I was getting desperate to make him forgive me. Weeks went by and I settled into my new job. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I was slowly building a new life for myself. I tried calling my husband multiple times, but he never answered my calls or replied to my messages. I was still living alone in my small apartment with no one but George to confide in. Just as I had settled in my work, I was fired from that job as well. I had suspicion that this was my husband's doing as well. All the progress had gone to the bin, and I was back to square one. I couldn't control it anymore. I went to my husband's home and confronted him. I asked him what he wanted. He couldn't just keep taking away my work. He got livid and said that I should have thought about it before cheating on me. My husband had found out from his friends that I had gotten my new job because of George. He thought that I was having an affair with George. He told me that he hated me and that he wished he had never met me. He was in so much anger that I got scared. I tried to explain that there was nothing going on between me and George, and he was just helping me out to find a job. I swore to him but he didn't believe me. I got desperate and tried to justify the events of that night once again. I told him that I was really drunk and had way too many vodka shots. He laughed at me and told me that he cannot believe I was justifying my cheating to him. That night, I felt like I had lost my husband. The distance and coldness in his voice made it clear that he didn't want to do anything to me anymore. I had tears in my eyes when I was leaving that house. This time it seemed that I was never going to come back to this house. I kept applying for jobs at other places only to get rejected everywhere. I stopped talking to George as well. Seeing him brought back the guilt of that night when I kissed him, and it reminded me of everything that happened after that. One day when I was getting back to my apartment after another job interview, I saw an envelope waiting for me. My husband had sent me divorce papers. I couldn't stop the tears when I saw the papers. My marriage was ending because of me. It was only then that I realized that a single kiss had brought my entire world crashing down. I had never thought that a single mistake of mine could cost me my marriage and everything else. But here I was, alone, with no one to turn to for help. I didn't have many friends in town, and the ones that I had made were mutual friends with me and my husband. They were no way going to be with me and lose their friendship with him. I didn't even have my family, as they all had moved to another state because of my dad's transfer. The next few days seemed like an extremely long and painful nightmare. I went through every emotion possible, from sadness to anger, guilt to despair. I eventually stopped feeling anything at all and just knew that the only way forward was to slowly start rebuilding my life by myself. I took a deep breath and wiped away my tears. It was time to face reality and move on. I decided to sign the divorce papers. I couldn't fight for my marriage when my husband didn't want to. He had given up on me. I didn't even blame him. After all, it was me who had cheated on him. I signed the papers and went to my husband's house to give it to him. I also had to pack the rest of my stuff kept in his house. He opened the door and let me in. I gave him the papers and told him that I needed to get my stuff as well. He just nodded and made way for me to get to the bedroom. As I was going through my things, I came across a small note that my husband had left for me on our first anniversary. It read, "I love you more than anything in this world. You are my life, my soulmate, and my partner in crime. Happy anniversary, my love." The note made me cry even more. What had gone so wrong? How did we end up here? Where did all the love go? I packed as many things as I could manage and then left his house. I thought that maybe he would look at me with longing, just for a second, but nothing like that happened. There was only coldness in his eyes. After I came back to my apartment, I decided to take a break from everything and went for a walk. I walked aimlessly, lost in my thoughts. I didn't realize that I was about to get hit by a car speeding my way. A stranger had pulled me back from the road. That incident finally shook something inside me. I decided that I wasn't going to continue being a damsel in distress and was finally going to take control of my life. I left a message to my husband telling him that if he was sure about his decision, then I needed the divorce to be granted as soon as possible. He didn't reply back to me, but his lawyers contacted me and told me that the divorce proceedings won't take much time since it was an amicable divorce. They informed me of the terms mentioned in the divorce. My husband was giving me a fair share of his life earnings. I know I didn't deserve it, and neither did he want to share that with me. He was required by the law to do so. I told them to tell my husband that I didn't need his money or his assets. I needed the money even more after I lost my job, but I thought maybe this will make him forgive me. It didn't. The lawyers contacted me back, telling me that my husband had said this won't have any impact on his decision. Our divorce proceedings started soon and went as smoothly as possible. During the time we were required to be at the court, my husband didn't even look at my direction and only talked to his lawyers. His cold behavior used to hurt me so much. Our divorce was granted within 3 months by the court. I remember that I kept hope till the last moment. When the judge asked my husband if he was sure he wanted to move ahead with it, I waited for him to say no. But nothing like that happened. My husband has been relieved to lose all connections with me after the divorce, where on the other hand, I miss him every day. I wish that I could go back in time and rectify my mistake, but that is just wishful thinking. I have to spend my entire living with the guilt of destroying my relationship with my husband. After my divorce, I went out for lunch with a friend. She had called me and asked to meet since it has been very long. I wasn't very interested, but I still agreed. The friend was a mutual friend of mine and my husband. She told me that my husband has started dating again. As soon as the words slipped from her, she realized what she had told me and then completely changed the topic. I couldn't believe her words. I accepted that I had made a very big mistake, but I really loved my husband and didn't even think about moving on. And he moved on so easily. I asked more about him, but she didn't tell me anything after that. I have no one to blame for my situation but myself. If I hadn't made that foolish mistake, I would still be at home with my husband. I cannot change what has already happened, and now I'm just trying to adapt to the changes now. I knew I couldn't keep running into my husband or see him with another woman. I thought the best way to escape this pain is to get away from this town. Noon was going to give me a job here anyway, especially now when everyone knew about my divorce. I found a job in another town nearby. It was very less salary than what I used to get working with my husband, but I had no other option, so I accepted it and moved to that town. My presence didn't matter to anyone in this town either way. I'm just trying to get by each day at the moment. Some days it feels too difficult. I'm thinking of saving some money and joining therapy sessions. Maybe that would help with the guilt I carry inside me. Please let me know what you guys think. Thank you for reading my story so far. It felt good to share this with all you people here on Reddit. Update. For everyone asking me how I am doing now, thank you for asking. If I'm being honest, I don't know if I'm okay or not. It's still hard to process everything that has happened, but I just try to not think about it too much. Every time I think about the last few months, I have a breakdown. I'm just hoping it gets better with time. And for the comments which asked if either me or my husband tried to contact each other after the divorce, I did try to reach him, but he has blocked my number and on other social media platforms. I have mailed him telling him that I'm sorry, and I hoped that he would talk to me again. But like I expected, there has been no reply from him. Update. It has been more than a year since my last update. Everything has changed quite a lot since then. I thought that I was finally moving on with life. My breakdowns had decreased. I was going to therapy sessions as well. I haven't been fired from my job, which was as good as it could get. In the last year, I had tried to contact my ex-husband on multiple occasions. He hadn't talked to me even once. I wished him on his birthday via mail. The day of our anniversary was really hard for me. I couldn't help but reach him out. He never responded to any of my mails. I was still blocked on his phone. I knew he was dating someone, as my friend told me. I thought he was able to forgive me by now, and will at least talk to me. It would have been enough for me if just talked to me, but nothing. I had finally left all hopes and was trying to move on with my life as well. Just as I was trying to move forward, I was brought 4 steps backward. Last month, I had to go to the town where my husband lives for some document verification purposes. I needed his signature on some documents. I tried to reach him through email about this, but he didn't reply. I thought of going there by myself. Maybe a small part of me was just looking for some excuse to see him again. I was really anxious about meeting him after such a long time. I went to his house and rang the doorbell. I didn't know what to expect, but I surely didn't expect what I saw. A woman opened the door. She was quite young. She was also prettier than me. I knew that he was dating someone shortly after divorce, so I should have gone prepared. However, I wasn't prepared to see that woman pregnant. Her belly was showing clearly. She must have been around 5 months pregnant. It hurted me a lot to see another woman in his house pregnant with his child. I immediately got the thoughts as to how it should have been me having his child. We had a fight about having a baby when I went out that night with George. Guilt hit me hard as I stood there. I started getting thoughts as to how we wouldn't have gone this apart if we had a child to connect us with each other. I tried to compose myself. I told myself that I couldn't cry in my ex's house in front of the woman pregnant with his child. I told that woman who I was and that I needed his signature. She recognized me and told me that he's out and that to leave the paper with her. She'll courier them to me. She was kicking me out from the house, which used to be mine earlier. I nodded and gave her my address. I left that house with tears in my eyes and then came back to my apartment. I started having breakdowns again after that day. I started getting dreams about him with that woman and their child. I scheduled a session with my therapist, but even that didn't help. I have realized that I cannot escape this guilt and regret. It will always accompany me. I'm sharing this here because it feels to share my story without having someone judging me. If any of you know something to do which will make this easier, please share with me. I'm willing to try anything at this point.
Life was fun and interesting until it wasn't. People of Reddit, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Is there anyone who has experienced what I'm about to narrate here? How did you get through it? Did you ever think of taking revenge? I am 29, used to think I had the best luck amongst the people I knew. I was born into a middle-class family, but my parents were rich enough to pay for my schooling, right down to university, so I don't have any student debt. 2 years after school, I met and fell in love with the most perfect lady ever, and then I married her not so long after. I got a job quite early, since I had worked at a big company, name withheld for personal reasons, during my internship days, and they had offered me a job immediately after I left school. So I didn't even get to spend a day unemployed after school. It was at this company I met my wife, Danielle, 32, she was a customer of the company and she came in regularly. Slowly but surely we started to get comfortable with each other. She came over during my lunch break sometimes. We were so close then that my manager made me sole manager of the project that tied my company and hers, that way we never lose them as a client, he said. She mentioned a few things she liked for her ideal man to have, things I tried to model because I was already smote by her. She said she loved a strong man, in good shape and knew how to use his fist when necessary. I was a slim young man, so I started to hit the gym. I also got into kickboxing, not because she said so, but because I found it to be a good outlet for controlled violence, where two consenting adults beat themselves to shit until one taps out. Also, I started to slowly let her know that I didn't just want to be a friend of hers, but that I wanted more. I started to flirt, tried to be charming and chivalrous, and was pretty telling of my intentions. At first she was put off by the age difference, as I was 2 years younger than she was. With time though, she started to also take a liking to me, which was good.
Hey everyone. Unfortunately, basically everyone who is watching these videos isn't subscribed. It would mean the world to me to quickly get out of the full screen video for 3 seconds and press that subscribe button. It's free, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Sorry for bothering, and thank you so much if you subscribed.
It didn't take long before we were dating, and not even longer after that, we were engaged. Might have been rushed on my part, to be honest. She even said so one day, but hey, I knew I wanted her in my life. Not more than 2 years after dating, we became misses. When I turned 25, I had an idea for a business and I had started to set it in motion. She supported my every move, and even when it cost money to support, she supported me with the money I needed. I thought I had a gem of a woman. Life really comes at you fast. I made huge profits from the business I started, big enough for me to think of having kids with her and also big enough for me to quit my job. After a few more ups and downs, I decided to seek outside help. Some sort of outside investment or a big name to help me push my brand further. So aged 27, I had the opportunity to be on Sharks. For those who don't know what Sharks is, it's this huge-ass reality TV show here in the US, where you get to pitch your ideas and business to the hosts, Sharks, who then decide whether or not your ideas, business plan or product is worth their investment or money. I didn't go in expecting a bid, but still I offered $500,000 for 10% shares in the company. I thought if I lowballed myself I'd get an offer from at least one of them. Even if 3 of them decided to buy in, I and my Danielle would still have 70%, I thought to myself as I prepared my pitch. Things went smoothly on that day. I managed to get them into a bidding war, and I ended up with a take it or leave it offer of $11M for the company in entirety. Of course I accepted the offer. It was double the offer I gave them and even $4 million more than the actual value of the company. When I got home I opened the most expensive champagne I had and we celebrated such a big dub. That night, my wife and I were very passionate. I don't know if it was the happiness that came from selling the company or from the drinks, it might have even been a result of both of them. That was the day our son, who's now 13 months old, was conceived. The next day, I went to the office with my lawyer, where I met Mark Cuban, the shark who made the offer, and his lawyer were already waiting for my arrival. In a few hours, every single detail needed to run the company was explained to his lawyers. I also added that he was free to do anything with the company, but that I would love it if he kept the workers I had. Those guys really helped me and I didn't want them to be out on the streets whilst I smiled all the way to the Bahamas. As that was the last day in charge, I gave all my workers a raise. I didn't need a reason to, and the joy in their eyes and the continuous thanks made me smile. It was bad enough that I was leaving, so I decided to leave them with a goodbye gift. The day ended with me signing all the necessary documents for change of ownership and all. I was paid an additional $1 million to sign a non-compete, which meant I wouldn't try to create another such company and take all their clients. I left happily. My life went according to plan. I worked hard and made enough money to retire 3 years earlier than I even thought. Now I could spend the rest of my time doing things I was passionate about. I had picked an interest in football. I called it soccer then, but now I have achieved enlightenment. So I now had time to watch football matches. I also got more active in the gym and in kickboxing. I trained every day, from 9 to 4. I also sparred with some people who were willing. The bruises and scars from those sparring made me love fighting more with each passing day, so much so that I decided I was going to do kickboxing, even though locally. I got so good at fighting that I literally became the champion of the city. The biggest kickboxer in our city. In just 5 months I became so good that people started to fear getting in the ring with me. I had a respectable record of 13 wins, 1 draw, and 3 losses, with 7 TKOs a part of my record. Some agencies tried to reach out to me to join them and to go pro, but I opted against doing so, cause I retired from work. I didn't want to go back to any form of work again, also I had a kid on the way. Even though I opted against doing the kickboxing thing for a job, I still kept up appearances and further increased my record. I started doing a little bit of interstate games also. I had taken 2 games before my wife gave birth and I stopped fighting altogether. Also, I sparred with my coach from time to time. My coach was a middle-aged man who used to be a pro boxer. He wasn't a good boxer and had more losses than he had wins. Sometimes I even wondered why I let him coach me. He was absolutely ripped and shredded and was about 3 inches taller than me. My wife put to bed on the 25th of December, 2021. Yep, you bet your ass I named him Jesus. I had become something of a public figure in the city, a kickboxing sensation, they called me. I was just 27 then, so I guess one wouldn't have been wrong to think that I was an upcoming kickboxer. I drove her to the hospital that Christmas. The roads were free, so I sped through, no regards for the law. I hurriedly got her a room and within a minute she was already 7 centimeters dilated, so the birth process started. I sat there, holding her hand as she pushed the child out. It was a boy. A carbon copy of myself. Anyone who knew me would know the kid was mine at first glance. I had a mini-me. My joy knew no bounds. Weeks after childbirth, my wife started to change. I had decided that we were moving to a more quiet environment to raise the child and other subsequent children, but my wife, who initially loved the idea, now hated it. This wasn't the only thing she now hated. She hated her child, she hated the foods she used to love, she hated me, and sometimes, I think she hated herself also. I heard it was something that came with childbirth, child hating. Even though I thought the hating was too much and also unwarranted. She didn't want to be around the child, nor did she want to be around me. I tried to help her get through it, but nothing I did seemed to be helpful, nor even appreciated. The baby started having formula 2 weeks after being born because the mother didn't want to breastfeed him. Then one day, I booked a trip to Dubai as a surprise getaway for her. I showed her the tickets and for the first time in 2 months she was happy. She jumped on me, probably the first time she had touched me since she gave birth. The trip made her so happy. She breastfed the child that night and she did for the days leading to the trip. She also had milk prepared for the child, for when we were away. Well, we went out and I had her mom come over to take care of our child. Honestly, we really had fun in Dubai. I used that opportunity to get a place in the environment I had wanted, a mini mansion which had about 10 rooms, a huge garage that would fit almost 12 cars, and a big pool. Was warned against having a pool because of the child. I wanted my wife to be happy, so I made sure it had everything she wanted. I also got a house beside the mansion, a house which I pulled down to build myself a barn, or a farm. We ended up using it to start a poultry. Everything didn't cost much, about $1.7 million. Yeah, I know that's still a ton of money. We spent a week on our trip, we visited places, Burj Khalifa, went on a Burj Al Arab boat tour, amongst other things. The smile on her face every day was something I loved so much. The nights were also a marvel, sex was brazy. When I say brazy, I mean absolutely nasty. I learned a lot of new things in the bedroom during that week in Dubai. When we returned from the trip, I drove her to our new house. She absolutely loved it. It was in the countryside, a very quiet environment and a place where our child can grow up amongst other kids and actually enjoy his childhood. She thanked me for bearing with her in the months when she behaved absolutely horribly. She promised to try not to return to such habits. Well, about my kickboxing career, I and my coach opened a gym in the area, closer to the city though, cause I knew it would be hard to get people in the countryside to join a gym, especially since a lot of them already did heavy-duty jobs. I also trained kids and young adults who were willing to learn and paid how to kickbox themselves. The gym became a real hit in the area. Though not many men were at the gym, we had a ton of middle-aged women visit regularly. Sometimes, when you walked in the gym, you'd think it was a female-exclusive space. The husbands of the women were happy that we were able to get their wives to care about their shape. They would regularly come in to thank Coach and I, and sometimes, they also left tips. It wasn't long before I noticed the real reason why the gym had a lot of women around. My coach was French, and his French accent was really strong. Add that to the fact that this man was a 6'3" mountain of a man, who was probably the fittest person in the countryside, myself included. You have yourself a build that women adored and a voice that made them wet. He, on the other hand, found a way to turn his admirers to clients. I didn't care much about that. My initial doubts were cleared and the gym was hugely profitable. So I did my bi-weekly training with the 12 people who signed up and then sparred periodically with the coach. The spars had a lot of the women watching. Soon we started to host fights and charge the women and other people for viewership. Well, now it had been 6 months since we moved countryside and Danielle had now reverted to her hating ways. She at least breastfed the child for 6 months, which was the bare minimum, before she went back to not wanting to see nor touch the baby. This really made me furious because I had to hire a nanny when I had my wife. We fought regularly about this, sometimes way into the night. Due to the fights we had, I started to sleep in one of the many rooms in the house. At some point I too started to not love her a lot, waking up every day and seeing your child in the arms of another woman while your wife did nothing but sunbathing by the pool, reading her magazines. That attitude disgusted me and I hope within me that she'd change before we lose the love we had for each other. Slowly but surely, she started leaving the house. Which was good, I guess. This was until I found out where she always went when I was home. Well, if you were thinking into my gym, you're right on money. She would stop by my gym daily, when I wasn't around, and whenever I came around when she was in the gym, she'd be acting all different. She'd be acting the way she does when I caught her doing something she shouldn't be doing. At first I thought she'd started smoking again, as she had stopped when she got pregnant with baby Jesus. I asked her if she had started smoking, but she denied it. She said she hadn't had a puff of smoke since we started trying for a baby, which was even months before she took in. She got annoyed at the fact that I asked, as they all do. I tried to explain that I simply asked because she stopped breastfeeding and started going out more, so I thought she was smoking and stopped breastfeeding so that she wouldn't hurt the baby. Guess what she said? If I were smoking again, I'd breastfeed him more than before. Maybe if he had brain damage and D****, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
What the actual How on earth is this woman a mother? I couldn't stomach what she said, so I left for the poultry farm. My life liked to sunbathe to get away from her responsibilities. I liked to feed the chickens. While I was in the poultry, I saw her leave again. This time a thought entered my cranium: follow her. I thought since she said she wasn't smoking again, what could she possibly be doing? Like a reflex action, I stepped in the car and tailed her, and she drove to the gym. The gym? Why is she heading for the gym? We don't open on Sundays. I thought to myself. I sat in my car, just a bit far from the gym so I could see what's going on and not be noticed. I saw my coach walk out of the gym. I thought she said she doesn't smoke. What could she be doing with coach who smokes in the gym on Sundays? What I saw next dropped my jaw. Coach gave Danielle a flower and then the two kissed, passionately. Hell. Then it started coming back to me. I remembered some of the women who had a crush on him used to come up to me and joke about how the coach now has a girlfriend so they might stop coming to the gym. I always used to laugh it off, cause I knew they wouldn't stop coming and also I knew nothing about a new girlfriend. The women didn't know my wife, none of them had ever seen her so they didn't know that my business partner and coach had been my wife. Well, I was stuck in my chair for a while. Surely this was the last straw. I went back home. I started to keep tabs on her activity, both their activities. I tried to see if I could get any of them to come clean about the affair they were having, but none of them did. Obviously, the next step was to plan my way out of this. I went to the city to meet with my lawyers. He now worked with Mark Cuban because aside from myself and the workers, he was the only other person who really understood the operations. We had a long conversation, catching up. He told me how much the company was worth now, over $100 million. I was happy that my idea really made that much of an impact. We got down to the actual reason why I came to see him. I discussed my plan right out of the marriage. He told me the whole thing was going to be shitty because infidelity wasn't seen as a reason for separation under the laws in which we got married. He also said that I might have to part with half the money I have right now because she stopped working because of me and she also helped fund my startup before I sold it. When I got home I decided I was going to find a loophole. It took some time but I found one. I opened a trust fund for baby Jesus and put all but $1.5 million in it. I also discussed with Coach and we discussed a favorable deal where he bought out my share of the gym. The money I got from the sale of the gym I put into my mother's account. That was just last week, but now I don't know what to do. Which is honestly why I am here. I need help, advice, criticism, everything and anything I could get. Update. Well, it's been a year. I'm still married to the bitch. We haven't been intimate in a year, which is funny and also good because I don't know what has been in there and I don't want to mix DNAs with nonsense. I plan to get something though. I needed to do something of some sorts, so I planned a revenge. To get to deal with things myself. During our spars, I started letting Coach win more than he normally would. He would get cocky after his wins and I would tell him that I was just rusty. In my conversations with him I started to put an idea in his head. A no-holds-barred match. At this point, I had strategically lost 17 spars in a row against him. Slowly but surely, he bought into the idea. He started to train for the match, and we started to advertise it. Most of the women who liked him had got tickets to distribute to friends. I made sure it was going to be big. The only thing I didn't do was televise it, though I had the means to. When the day of the match drew closer, my wife started talking to me more about it. She'd tell me to go easy on him, that he was 10 years older than me, so he would be weaker. She knew how strong I was, and I think she was worried I'd break the face she sat on regularly. On the other hand, I started to do little things to annoy the coach. I would flirt with some of the women in the gym, especially the ones he told me he liked the most. I would break things, just to get under his skin. I no longer shared the losses, so I didn't have to pay for broken stuff. He started to complain soon. Yep, this fool was walking straight into my trap. He started to get a little more aggressive in our spars, which made me know things were going as planned. I kept up the petty antics. One day, I accidentally drove into the gym. That was $5,000 worth of damage right there, and due to the gym clause I signed when I switched from owner to customer, the gym clause which stated that damage done by paying customers were covered by the establishment, I didn't have to pay for shit. He came out absolutely furious. He was shouting at the top of his voice. I finally got him where I wanted. I shouted, mostly telling him to shut up, that it was an accident and it could happen to anyone. I went a step further and added, accidents like this one and your doping incident that made you retire as a worthless, waste of space boxer happens. He wailed. I hit him where he hurt the most. Don't worry, come next month, I'll show you who really is the waste of space. He continued wailing and screaming at me as I sat in front of the bar. Some of the women came to my aid, asking me if I was hurt and all that. I told coach I wasn't sparring anymore, that if he wanted to prove he wasn't as useless as his father thought, he should beat me in front of the crowd. Did I take it too far? Probably. Do I care? No. He crossed the line in our relationship when he decided my wife was a sex toy to be used. Said wife came back home later that day, shouting and screaming at me for crashing into the shop. She was in a fit of rage, so wild that she accidentally slipped the already known fact that she was sleeping with him. That was when it hit her. All I did was just a plan to rile him up so that I could get him into a ring which he probably would have to be stretched out of. She started pleading with me to go easy on him, to forgive her, to yada, yada, yada. Pleas that fell on deaf ears. I didn't see the coach again until the D-Day. Day of his reckoning. I was able to get myself up to his weight class, and though he was still 20 pounds heavier, I was certain I would destroy this bastard. The match started, and in less than 20 minutes the match ended. He had started coming at me with all the rage he had. I soaked in all his attacks cause for someone who was a boxer, he hit like a girl. At the start of the second round, I unleashed my evil intent. He had gone into the second round leading on points, but after the first elbow shot hit him at the back of the head, things changed and the 5,000 people in the audience saw that things changed. I pound this mother like a Nigerian woman would pound yam for their savory pounded yam and a goosey soup delicacy. Halfway into the second round he couldn't even stand well. He was staggering around the place, he fell down twice and he wanted to stay down, but I shouted at him, "Your father would be rolling in his grave right now. How can such a great boxer give birth to such a failure? 39 matches in your career and you had no KOs, not even one. You're a disgrace to combat sports." He stood up and I pounded him more, again and again and again. I hit him in the jaw with my knee. That was the last time he stood up. He fell face first, but I still followed him down, landing an elbow to the spine. I put him in a submission lock and he tapped immediately. I had one. I knelt beside him and whispered in his ear, "I know you are my wife, I've known for a year now. That was why I suggested you step in the ring with me. You stupid fella, you saw my fights, you saw how people trembled when I walked in the ring and you thought you could beat me because I stopped fighting for 2.5 years, I added. I stood up and looked in the direction of my wife. She was horrified. The ambulance came and Jim was stretchered out. She made to leave, but my lawyer held her, giving her the papers he had in his hands. I had served her and I was ready to give her whatever she wanted. She just had to go. The reason why I did what I did to the coach was because he had known me for close to 9 years, we were very good friends, and even started a gym together, yet he still decided to lay with my wife. Out of close to 30 women who had a crush on him, he chose my woman. I took a microphone and announced my return to kickboxing to the audience, and even better, I announced that I now consider doing it for a living. That's where we are right now, guys. I've started the journey towards single life. Update 2. Well guys, it has been 3 years since the epic grudge match versus French fries, as you guys call him in the comments. I am now divorced 2 years, although I had to forfeit the mansion and 40% of all my other assets, which meant she got 1% shares of Amazon, 0.4% shares in Tesla, and also $500,000 cash. Now those shares are worth millions, and the divorce has literally made her the richest woman in our town, but hey, that's life for you, at least I got my kid. Full custody. I also went back into kickboxing, and now I have an even better record of 32 wins, 1 draw, and 3 losses. I hadn't lost a match since I got back 3 years ago. All in all, I am enjoying myself. I'm still very rich, wealthy in capitals. Also now, I have finally found peace. I thank you all for reading this and for bearing with me as I lived this story for you. I hope that whoever sees this and is hurting from a similar situation finds solace in the comments. I will be moving on to other things like raising my son, taking cooking classes, and so on and so forth. Thanks.
Okay.
Medium dark skin tone emoji modifier.